malicious compliance stepdad demanded I quit, so I got him fired instead. You're embarrassing me just by existing here. Those were the exact words my stepdad Rick hissed at me while I was restocking shelves in the electronics section of Megamart on a Tuesday evening. I'd been working there for 8 months, saving every penny for college, and suddenly this guy who'd been in my life for exactly 3 weeks thought he could dictate my future. I'm literally just doing my job, I whispered back, glancing around to make sure no customers were within earshot. The last thing I needed was a scene in aisle 12. Rick stepped closer, his Megamart middle management badge catching the fluorescent lights. Your job shouldn't exist. Do you have any idea how it looks when people find out the district operations manager's stepson is some minimum wage shelf monkey? The way he said stepson made it sound like a disease. I kept my hands busy arranging phone cases, trying to stay calm. It's part-time, and I'm saving for college. Mom said you understood that. Your mother says a lot of things. His voice dropped to that particular tone that made my stomach clench, the same one he used when he thought Mom couldn't hear him. But I'm telling you right now, quit, or I'll make your life here so miserable you'll quit anyway. I finally looked up at him. Rick was one of those guys who wore his authority like cologne, too much of it, and it made everyone around him uncomfortable. Everything about him screamed, peaked in high school football, from his too tight polo shirts to the way he puffed out his chest when he walked the sales floor. I'm not quitting, I said quietly. I need this job. His face went red. Actually red, like a cartoon character about to explode. You need to learn some respect. I'm your father now. You're not my father. The words came out before I could stop them. The silence stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. Other employees were starting to notice. I could see Jenny from customer service pretending to organize returns while obviously eavesdropping. Rick leaned in close enough that I could smell his coffee breath. We'll see about that, kid. We'll see how long you last when you can't even handle the basic requirements of your job. Then he walked away, his dress shoes squeaking against the linoleum, leaving me standing there with a box of phone cases and a growing pit in my stomach. I should have seen it coming, honestly. The guy had steamrolled into our lives like he owned the place, charming my mom with fancy dinners and weekend trips while I was at school or work. By the time I realized what was happening, they were engaged. By the time I processed that, they were married in some quickie courthouse ceremony that I barely made it to because, ironically, I had to work. Mom kept saying I'd warm up to him, that we just needed time to bond. She couldn't see what I saw, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he talked over her at dinner, the way he'd already started rearranging our house like his personal kingdom. But this? Threatening my job. That crossed a line I didn't even know existed. As I watched Rick disappear into the back offices, probably already plotting ways to make my work life hell, I made a decision. If he wanted to play games with my future, then game on. I had no idea I was about to discover just how many rules Rick had been breaking. The first sign that Rick wasn't bluffing came 3 days later during my Friday evening shift. I was scheduled to work electronics until close, which meant handling the usual parade of customers asking if we had that thing from the commercial, without any other details. Pretty standard stuff. But when I clocked in, my supervisor Marcus pulled me aside with a confused expression. Hey, so. Apparently there's been some complaints about your customer service. He scratched his head, looking genuinely puzzled. Corporate got a call saying you were rude to multiple customers last weekend. My blood went cold. What? That's impossible. I worked Saturday morning in the stockroom doing inventory. I barely interacted with any customers. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Your customer feedback scores have always been solid. Marcus shrugged. But I have to document this conversation, you know. HR policy. Just, be extra careful about your interactions, okay? I nodded, but my mind was racing. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Rick had access to all the customer complaint systems as a district manager. Of course he did. That night, I started keeping a notebook. Every shift, every interaction, every task I completed. If Rick wanted to play dirty, I needed to cover myself. The second incident happened the following Tuesday. I came in for my 4 p.m. shift to find that someone had scheduled me for a double. Apparently I was supposed to work until 2 a.m. helping with a store reset. News to me. I never agreed to stay that late, I told Marcus when he found me. I have school tomorrow, and my mom's expecting me home for dinner. It's right here in the system, he said, showing me his tablet. You were supposed to confirm by Monday. Nobody told me about this. Can you check who entered it? Marcus tapped around for a minute, then frowned. Looks like it came from district. Weird. Usually they go through me for scheduling changes. District. Of course. I called my mom to explain why I'd be late, and spent the next 10 hours helping rearrange half the store while fighting to stay awake. When I finally got home at 2:30 a.m., Rick was conveniently in the living room, reading on his tablet. Rough night at work, he asked without looking up, but I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Just fine, I managed through gritted teeth. Good. Character building, hard work. You should be grateful for the opportunity. I wanted to throw something at his smug face, but I dragged myself upstairs instead. Mom was already asleep, and I had exactly 4 hours before I needed to get up for school. The pattern continued for 2 weeks. Sudden schedule changes. Mystery complaints. Getting assigned to the worst tasks, cleaning the employee bathrooms, dealing with returns that should have gone to customer service, reorganizing the chaotic stockroom that hadn't been properly maintained in months. The worst part was watching it affect my grades. I fell asleep in calculus twice. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been helping me prep for college applications, asked if everything was okay at home. I didn't know how to explain that my stepdad was systematically trying to destroy my ability to function like a normal human being. Mom noticed too, but when she asked about it, Rick was right there with helpful commentary about how part-time jobs could be overwhelming for teenagers, and maybe it was time to focus on family and school instead. You do look exhausted, honey, Mom said over dinner one night, her voice full of concern. Maybe Rick has a point about the job being too much stress. I stared at my plate, feeling the trap closing around me. Rick was winning, and he knew it. Across the table, he was cutting his steak with methodical precision, looking like the picture of a concerned stepfather. But I wasn't giving up that easily. That's when I started paying attention to what Rick was really doing during his shifts at Megamart. The breakthrough came during my Saturday morning shift in the stockroom. I was scanning inventory, another one of Rick's character-building assignments, when I noticed something weird about the delivery logs. 3 boxes of high-end tablets were marked as damaged in transit and listed for disposal, but I personally unloaded those same boxes from the truck 2 days earlier. They'd been perfectly fine. I even remembered joking with Carlos from receiving about how careful the shipping company had been with the packaging. I pulled up the damage report on the handheld scanner. Rick's employee ID was all over it. He'd processed the claim, authorized the disposal, and signed off on the insurance paperwork. But those tablets were sitting right there in the damaged goods section, and when I carefully opened one of the boxes, the tablet inside was pristine. Not even a scratch on the screen. My hands were literally shaking as I closed the box. This wasn't just workplace harassment anymore. Rick was stealing. Actually stealing thousands of dollars worth of merchandise and covering it up with fake damage reports. I took pictures with my phone, the boxes, the damage reports, the disposal forms, everything. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it echoing through the stockroom. Finding everything okay back here? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Marcus had appeared in the doorway, and I quickly shoved my phone back in my pocket. Yeah, just checking on those damaged tablets from Tuesday's shipment, I managed, hoping my voice sounded normal. Marcus walked over and glanced at the boxes. Oh, those. Yeah, Rick said they got banged up pretty bad during transport. Insurance should cover the loss. He picked up one of the boxes and frowned. Packaging doesn't look too beat up, though. That's what I thought too, I said carefully. The outside looks fine. Huh. Marcus set the box down. Well, I'm sure Rick knows what he's doing. Guy's got 15 years of retail management experience. After Marcus left, I spent the rest of my shift in a weird state of hyper-awareness. Every time I saw Rick walking through the store, my stomach clenched. When he stopped by the stockroom to check on my progress, I could barely look him in the eye. How's the inventory coming along? He asked, his tone perfectly pleasant. Like he hadn't been making my life miserable for weeks. Good. Almost done with electronics. Excellent. You know, I was just thinking, you've been working pretty hard lately. Maybe it's time to consider whether this job is really the right fit for you. There it was again. The constant pressure to quit, but now it felt different. More urgent. Was he worried I might stumble across more evidence of his little side business? I like working here, I said, meeting his eyes directly for the first time in days. I'm learning a lot. Something flickered across Rick's face, just for a second, but then his manager's smile snapped back into place. Well, we'll see how long that enthusiasm lasts. Sometimes the learning curve can be steep. After he left, I sat there in the stockroom surrounded by boxes and inventory sheets, trying to process what I discovered. Rick wasn't just a controlling stepdad who was embarrassed by his stepson's retail job. He was a thief who was probably terrified that having me around would eventually expose his scheme. No wonder he wanted me gone. But now I had a choice to make. I could quit like he wanted and pretend I'd never seen those damage reports. Or I could dig deeper and figure out exactly how much Rick had been stealing, and what I was going to do about it. The smart thing would probably be to walk away. Keep my head down, find another job, avoid the whole mess. Instead, I opened my notebook and started writing down everything I could remember about those tablet boxes. If Rick wanted to play games with my future, I was about to change the rules entirely. The next few days felt like I was living a double life. During the day, I went through the motions of being a normal high school student, taking notes in AP history, eating lunch with my friends, pretending everything was fine. But every spare moment, I was planning. I started volunteering for extra shifts, which probably confused the hell out of Marcus since I'd been complaining about being overworked for weeks. But I needed access. I needed to understand the full scope of what Rick was doing before I made any moves. You sure you want to pick up Sarah's Sunday shift? Marcus asked when I approached him. That's the 6 a.m. inventory truck. Most people avoid that one like the plague. I could use the extra money, I lied smoothly. Plus, I'm trying to show more initiative around here. What I didn't say was that Sunday morning shifts meant Rick wouldn't be there. District managers didn't roll in until noon on weekends, which gave me a perfect window to investigate without looking over my shoulder every 5 minutes. The early shift was brutal. My alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. and I felt like a zombie stumbling through the empty parking lot in the pre-dawn darkness. But when that delivery truck rolled up and I started helping Carlos unload boxes, I felt more awake than I had in weeks. You're here early for a weekend, Carlos commented as we wheeled in a pallet of electronics. Thought you kids liked sleeping in. Trying to save up for college, I said, which was still true, even if it wasn't my main motivation anymore. Hey, can I ask you something? How often do we get merchandise that's actually damaged during shipping? Carlos paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. Not too often, honestly. Maybe once or twice a month. Why? Just curious. Seems like we've been processing a lot of damage claims lately. Yeah, I noticed that too. He lowered his voice and glanced around, even though we were alone in the receiving area. Between you and me, some of those damaged items looked perfectly fine to me. But hey, I just unload trucks. What do I know about insurance claims? My pulse quickened. Which items seemed fine to you? Last month there was a whole shipment of gaming consoles that got marked as damaged. But I swear those boxes were in better shape than most of our regular deliveries. And those smartwatches from 2 weeks ago? Not a scratch on the packaging. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was practically vibrating with excitement. This wasn't just about those tablets I'd found. Rick had been running this scam for months, maybe longer. Who usually handles the damage assessments? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Your stepdad, mostly. Makes sense, since he's got the authority to process insurance claims. Carlos hefted another box. Lucky guy gets to deal with all that paperwork. Lucky. Right. After Carlos left to grab the next pallet, I found myself alone and receiving with access to the damage report computer terminal. My hands were literally trembling as I logged in with my employee credentials and pulled up the reports from the past 3 months. What I found made my stomach drop. 12 separate damage claims. All processed by Rick. All for high-value electronics, tablets, gaming systems, smartphones, laptops. The total value was over $35,000. $35,000. I quickly grabbed my phone and started photographing the screen, my heart hammering so loud I was sure it would echo through the entire stockroom. This wasn't petty theft. This was serious felony territory. The sound of the receiving door rolling open made me jump so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I slammed the terminal closed and spun around, expecting to see Rick standing there with that cold smile. Instead, it was just Marcus with a coffee cup, looking confused. "Didn't expect to see you on the computer this early," he said. "Everything okay with the delivery?" "Yeah, just checking to see if we were expecting any special handling items," I managed, hoping he couldn't hear the guilt in my voice. "Cool. Carlos find you okay?" "Yep, we're good." Marcus nodded and headed toward his office, but I caught him glancing back at me with a puzzled expression. I realized I was probably acting sketchy as hell, but I couldn't help it. The weight of what I discovered was crushing. Rick wasn't just making my work life miserable out of spite. He was protecting a criminal operation that had been going on for months. And now I was the biggest threat to his scheme. No wonder he wanted me gone so badly. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The next Tuesday, I came into work to find my locker had been broken into. "Sorry kid, maintenance said they had to cut the lock," Marcus explained, looking genuinely apologetic. Apparently there was a report about suspicious items being stored in employee areas. My blood turned to ice. Suspicious items? What kind of suspicious items? Something about stolen merchandise possibly being hidden in lockers. I know it sounds crazy, but district ordered a random inspection. Marcus shrugged. "They didn't find anything in yours, obviously, but protocol says damaged locks get replaced. You'll get a new one from HR. I stared at my open locker, my work shirt hanging crooked, my spare phone charger tangled up, my notebook lying open on the bottom shelf. Someone had definitely been through everything. "When did this happen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "This morning, before your shift." Rick supervised the whole thing personally. Marcus paused, studying my face. "You look kinda pale. You okay?" "Yeah, just surprised, I guess." But I wasn't okay. Rick was sending me a message, and it was crystal clear. He knew that I knew. Somehow he'd figured out I was investigating him, and now he was escalating. I spent the rest of my shift paranoid that every customer, every coworker, every manager walking by was watching me. When I went to the stockroom to grab inventory, I half expected to find Rick waiting there with some new form of psychological torture. Instead, I found something worse. The damaged goods section had been completely cleaned out. All of it. The tablets I'd photographed, the gaming consoles Carlos had mentioned, everything. Just empty shelves where thousands of dollars in damaged merchandise used to sit. I stood there staring at the bare shelving unit, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. My evidence was gone. The physical proof of Rick's theft had vanished, probably carted away to wherever he'd been fencing stolen electronics for the past few months. Looking for something. I spun around to find Rick standing in the doorway, blocking my exit. His expression was perfectly neutral, but there was something predatory in his eyes that made my skin crawl. "Just checking inventory levels," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Find what you were looking for." The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. We both knew this wasn't really about inventory. "Everything seems to be in order," I replied carefully. Rick stepped into the stockroom, and suddenly the space felt claustrophobic. "You know, I've been thinking about our conversation from a few weeks ago. About whether this job is really working out for you. I told you, I'm not quitting." "See, that's the thing." Rick moved closer, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd grown to hate. "I don't think you understand how serious workplace theft accusations can be. Especially for someone your age, with college applications coming up." My mouth went dry. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, just hypothetically speaking. Imagine if someone found stolen merchandise in your car. Or your school locker. Or maybe discovered that you'd been accessing computer systems you weren't authorized to use." His smile was absolutely chilling. The kind of thing that wouldn't just cost you a job. The kind of thing that could ruin your entire future. I felt trapped between the empty shelves and Rick's bulk, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't just workplace harassment anymore. He was threatening to frame me for his own crimes. "I haven't stolen anything," I managed. "Of course not. You're a good kid." Rick's tone was almost paternal, which somehow made it worse. But sometimes good kids make bad choices when they're in over their heads. Sometimes they need guidance about when to walk away from situations that are too complicated for them to handle. The threat was so clear it might as well have been written in neon lights. "Quit, or he'd plant evidence and destroy my life." "I need to get back to work," I said, moving toward the door. Rick stepped aside just enough to let me pass, but as I squeezed by him, he spoke one more time. "Think carefully about your next moves, kiddo. Some games have consequences you can't take back." That night, I sat in my bedroom staring at my phone, trying to figure out who I could trust. Rick had made it clear he was willing to frame me for theft, and now I was sitting on evidence of a major criminal operation with no physical proof left to back up my claims. I couldn't tell my mom. She was so happy with Rick, constantly talking about how nice it was to have a stable man in our lives after years of financial stress. Plus, Rick had been carefully positioning himself as the concerned stepfather worried about my behavioral changes and attitude problems at work. If I came to her with accusations of theft and threats, whose word would she believe? My friends wouldn't understand the complexity of the situation. And going to Marcus or other Megamart employees felt dangerous. Rick had authority over all of them, and I had no idea who might report back to him. But I couldn't just quit and let him win. Not when he was stealing thousands of dollars and threatening to destroy my future to cover it up. That's when I remembered the photos on my phone. I'd been so focused on the physical evidence disappearing that I'd forgotten about the pictures I'd taken of the damage reports and the supposedly broken tablets. Rick might have cleared out the stockroom, but he couldn't delete what was already saved on my device. I scrolled through my camera roll with shaking hands until I found them, clear shots of the computer screen showing Rick's employee ID on multiple fraudulent damage claims, photos of the pristine tablets marked for disposal, pictures of the boxes with fabricated shipping damage reports. It wasn't everything, but it was something. Proof that Rick had been systematically marking undamaged merchandise for insurance claims. The question was what to do with it. The next morning at school, I found myself Googling corporate fraud reporting during lunch. Megamart had to have some kind of ethics hotline or internal investigation department. Most big companies did, especially for issues involving theft and insurance fraud. But every article I read emphasized the same point: you needed solid evidence and documentation to make allegations stick. Anonymous tips about employee theft were common, but without concrete proof, they rarely went anywhere. I was so absorbed in my research that I almost missed the text from my mom. Rick says you've been looking tired at work. Maybe come straight home after school today instead of staying late in the library. My stomach clenched. I hadn't told Rick I was staying after school to work on college applications. Which meant he was watching me more closely than I'd realized, tracking my schedule, probably trying to figure out what I was planning. The paranoia was starting to get to me. During chemistry class, I caught myself glancing toward the windows, wondering if Rick might drive by the school to check on me. When my phone buzzed with a notification, I jumped so hard that Mrs. Patterson asked if I was feeling all right. After school, I drove straight home like Mom had requested, but I took a detour through downtown to see if anyone was following me. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was in some kind of spy movie instead of just dealing with a workplace dispute, but Rick's threats had been very real. When I pulled into our driveway, Rick's car was already there. Through the kitchen window, I could see him and Mom talking over coffee, his hand resting on her shoulder in that possessive way that always made me uncomfortable. As I walked up to the front door, I heard Rick's voice carrying through the thin walls. Just think he's under more stress than he's admitting. The job might be affecting his schoolwork. I stood on the porch for a moment, keys in hand, realizing that Rick was already working on the next phase of his plan. He wasn't just threatening me anymore, he was building a narrative for my mom about why I was acting strange and paranoid. Setting up his cover story for when he finally made good on his threats. I walked into the house to find Mom and Rick at the kitchen table, looking like they'd been having a serious conversation. The kind where they stop talking the second someone else enters the room. "Hey honey," Mom said, but her smile seemed forced. "How was school?" "Fine." I grabbed a water bottle from the fridge, hyper-aware of Rick watching my every move. "What's up?" "We were just talking about your work schedule," Rick said smoothly. "Your mom mentioned you've seemed really stressed lately." I took a sip of water to buy myself time. "I'm fine. Just busy with college prep stuff." "That's actually what we wanted to discuss," Mom said, and something in her tone made my stomach drop. "Rick thinks it might be better if you took a break from the job to focus on your applications and grades. We could help you with college expenses," Rick added, his voice dripping with fake generosity. As a family. The trap was closing, and they both knew it. If I refused their generous offer, I'd look ungrateful and stubborn. If I accepted, I'd lose my financial independence and Rick would win completely. "I appreciate that, but I really want to keep working," I said carefully. "The job is teaching me responsibility." Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes responsibility means knowing when you're taking on too much." "Your grades are what matter most right now," Mom chimed in. "Mrs. Henderson called today. She said you fell asleep in calculus again yesterday." My heart sank. Of course she called. And of course Rick had probably answered the phone, spinning my exhaustion into evidence that I couldn't handle work in school. "I had a late shift Tuesday night," I explained. "It won't happen again." "That's exactly the problem," Rick said, leaning forward with that concerned stepfather expression he perfected. "These late shifts are affecting your ability to function. What happens when college admissions officers see your grades slipping senior year?" Mom nodded along, clearly buying into his logic. "Maybe just temporarily. Until you get your application submitted." I looked back and forth between them, feeling cornered. Rick's expression was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He'd found the perfect pressure point, my mom's worry about my future. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," Mom said quickly. "We're not trying to pressure you. We just want what's best." Rick's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it with a frown. "Sorry, work emergency. I need to head back to the store for a couple hours." He kissed Mom's cheek and squeezed my shoulder as he passed, a gesture that made my skin crawl. "Think about what we discussed, okay? Sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones." After he left, Mom and I sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. "You know he cares about you, right?" she said finally. "Rick just wants to see you succeed." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her everything, about the threats, the stolen merchandise, the way Rick had been systematically trying to destroy my life. But looking at her hopeful face, I realized Rick had been playing a much longer game than I'd understood. "I know, Mom." "Good." She smiled and started clearing the coffee cups. "Maybe you could invite some friends over this weekend. Rick was saying it might be nice for us to spend more family time together." As she puttered around the kitchen, chatting about weekend plans like everything was normal, I felt the walls closing in. Rick wasn't just stealing from Megamart, he was stealing my family, my job, my future. And he was doing it so smoothly that my own mother was helping him. But his "work emergency" comment had given me an idea. If Rick was rushing back to the store on a Wednesday night, it probably wasn't for anything legitimate. Maybe it was time to find out what he was really up to. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my car across the street from Megamart, feeling like the world's most amateur detective. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few employee cars and the overnight cleaning crew's van. Rick's silver sedan was parked near the employee entrance, confirming he was actually inside. I told Mom I was going to study at the library, which technically wasn't a complete lie since I had my calculus textbook with me as a prop. But instead of working on derivatives, I was watching the store's loading dock through my windshield, trying to figure out what constituted a work emergency at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. The smart thing would have been to go home. Rick had already made it clear he was willing to escalate if I kept pushing, and getting caught spying on him would probably give him all the ammunition he needed to convince Mom I was having some kind of breakdown. But I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was important. The timing felt too convenient. Right after our kitchen table intervention, Rick suddenly had urgent business at the store. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Jake. "You coming to Dylan's party Friday?" I stared at the message, realizing how completely my life had changed in the past month. A few weeks ago, my biggest worry was whether to take AP Physics or AP Chemistry next semester. Now I was conducting surveillance operations on my own family member. Before I could respond to Jake, I saw movement near the loading dock. A dark pickup truck had pulled up to the employee entrance, and someone was getting out. Even from across the street, I recognized the figure walking toward the building. It was Carlos from the receiving department. That was weird. Carlos worked mornings. What was he doing here during the evening shift? I grabbed my phone and zoomed in with the camera, trying to get a better view. Through the screen, I watched Carlos disappear inside the building. About 10 minutes later, he reappeared wheeling a large cart stacked with boxes. My pulse quickened as I watched him load the boxes into the pickup truck. Even from this distance, I could tell they were electronics packaging, the same size and shape as the tablets and gaming consoles that had mysteriously vanished from the damaged goods section. Carlos made 3 trips between the building and the truck, each time loading more boxes. The whole operation took maybe 20 minutes, efficient and obviously well rehearsed. When he finished, he shook hands with someone in the doorway, someone I couldn't quite make out from my vantage point. The pickup truck pulled away just as Rick emerged from the building, checking his phone and walking casually to his car like nothing had happened. I slumped down in my seat as his headlights swept across the parking lot, my heart hammering. This wasn't just Rick working alone. He had help. Carlos was part of it, maybe other employees too. The whole operation was bigger than I'd imagined. As Rick's car disappeared down the main road, I sat there trying to process what I'd witnessed. It wasn't enough to prove anything concrete. For all I knew, Carlos was helping with legitimate store transfers or emergency inventory moves. But combined with everything else I'd discovered, it painted a pretty clear picture of organized theft. The question was whether I was brave enough to try gathering real evidence, or smart enough to walk away before I got in over my head. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mom. "Rick says you left your work schedule on the kitchen counter. He brought it up to your room." Such a thoughtful guy. I stared at the text, feeling ice water flood my veins. I hadn't left any work schedule on the counter. Which meant Rick had been in my room, probably searching through my stuff while I was gone. Looking for evidence that I was building a case against him. The game was definitely escalating, and I was running out of time to decide which side I wanted to be on when everything exploded. I drove home in a state of controlled panic, my mind racing faster than my car. Rick had been in my room. Going through my things. Looking for evidence while feeding Mom some story about being helpful with my work schedule. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked deceptively normal. Warm light spilling from the living room windows, Mom's car parked in its usual spot, everything exactly as suburban and peaceful as Rick wanted it to appear. But I knew better now. I found Mom in the living room watching some cooking show, looking relaxed in a way that made my chest tight with anxiety. "Hey sweetie, how was the library?" she asked without looking away from the TV. "Fine. Got a lot done." I glanced toward the stairs. "Rick already leave?" "About 10 minutes ago. He said you'd left your schedule downstairs and he wanted to make sure you didn't forget about any shifts." She muted the TV and turned to face me. "You know, I really think you should consider what we talked about earlier. About taking a break from work. Did Rick say anything else when he was here?" Mom looked puzzled by the question. "Just that he was worried you might be taking on too much stress. He mentioned that some of the other managers have noticed you seem distracted lately." My stomach dropped. "Other managers? Marcus, I think. Rick said he's concerned about your performance review." Mom's voice took on that careful tone she used when she was trying not to upset me. "Honey, is everything okay at work? You can tell me if someone's giving you trouble." The irony was suffocating. She was literally asking if someone was giving me trouble, completely unaware that her husband was systematically destroying my life. "Everything's fine, Mom. I just need to get some homework done." As I headed upstairs, I caught her watching me with a worried expression that made me feel even worse. Rick wasn't just manipulating me, he was using Mom's genuine concern as a weapon. My room looked exactly the same as I'd left it, but I knew Rick had been there. Call it intuition or paranoia, but something felt different. I started checking my desk drawers, my closet, under my mattress, anywhere I might have hidden evidence if I were stupid enough to keep it in the house. That's when I found it. Tucked between my calculus textbook and my history binder was a single sheet of paper that definitely hadn't been there before. At first glance, it looked like a Megamart inventory form, the kind we used for tracking damaged merchandise. But when I looked closer, my blood turned to ice. It was a damage report for a shipment of laptops, dated 3 days ago. Marked as water damage during transport and authorized for disposal. The employee's signature at the bottom was mine. Except I'd never seen this form before in my life. My hands were shaking as I examined the signature. It was close, really close, but not quite right. The way the letters curved, the angle of my handwriting, someone had practiced this but hadn't gotten it perfect. Rick was setting me up. Actually creating forged documents to frame me for his theft operation. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the fake form from every angle, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hold the camera steady. This was evidence, but not the kind I wanted. This was proof that Rick was planning to throw me under the bus for everything he'd been stealing. The sound of a car door slamming outside made me freeze. Through my bedroom window, I could see Rick's sedan pulling into the driveway. He was back, probably to check whether I'd found his little present. I shoved the forged document back between my textbooks exactly where I'd found it, then quickly opened my calculus homework and tried to look like I'd been studying the whole time. Footsteps on the stairs. A soft knock on my door. "Hey kiddo, you up there?" Rick's voice was perfectly casual, like he was just being a friendly stepdad checking in. Yeah, just doing homework. Mind if I come in for a second? Wanted to chat about something. I wanted to scream no, but that would seem suspicious. Sure, come in. Rick opened the door and stepped into my room, his eyes immediately scanning everything like he was taking inventory. How's the studying going? Good. Almost done with calculus. That's great. He moved closer to my desk, and I had to fight every instinct not to flinch away from him. You know, I was thinking about our conversation earlier. About the job situation. What about it? Rick sat down on the edge of my bed without being invited, making himself at home in my personal space. I think there might be some things happening at work that you're not aware of. Some irregularities that could affect employees. My mouth went dry. What kind of irregularities? Oh, just some discrepancies in inventory management. Missing merchandise, falsified reports, that sort of thing. His tone was conversational, but his eyes were cold and calculating. The kind of thing that could really hurt someone's reputation if they got caught up in it accidentally. There it was. The threat wrapped in fake concern. I just do my job, I said carefully. Stock shelves, help customers, basic stuff. Of course. But sometimes good employees get blamed for other people's mistakes. Rick stood up and moved toward my bookshelf, his fingers trailing along the spines of my textbooks. Especially young employees who might not know how to protect themselves. I watched in sick fascination as his hand hovered right over the spot where he'd planted the forged document. He knew exactly where it was. The important thing is knowing when to step back from a situation that's getting complicated, he continued. Sometimes walking away is the smartest move a person can make. I understand. Good. Rick turned back to face me with that terrible smile. I'm glad we had this talk. Really cleared the air. After he left, closing the doors softly behind him, I sat at my desk staring at my calculus homework without seeing any of it. The message had been crystal clear, quit now, or he'd use that forged document to frame me for his entire operation. But as I sat there feeling trapped and furious, another thought occurred to me. If Rick was desperate enough to plant evidence in my room, it meant he was scared. Really scared. Which meant I was closer to exposing him than I'd realized. The question was whether I could gather enough real evidence to prove his crimes before he destroyed my life with fake evidence of my own. The next morning, I woke up with a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. If Rick wanted to play the evidence game, I'd give him evidence, just not the kind he was expecting. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this operation went and who else was involved. During my Thursday morning shift, I volunteered to help with receiving again. Carlos seemed surprised to see me, but not suspicious. Back for more punishment, he joked as we started unloading the delivery truck. Most people hate the early shifts. Actually, I wanted to ask you something, I said, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. About damaged merchandise procedures. Carlos's hand stilled on the box he was moving. What about them? I'm trying to understand the whole process. Like, what happens after items get marked for disposal? I kept my voice light, curious. Do they actually get thrown away, or? Why are you asking? His tone had shifted, become more guarded. Just trying to learn more about how the business works. Rick suggested I should understand all the different departments if I want to advance here. The mention of Rick's name seemed to relax Carlos slightly. Oh. Well, disposal procedures vary depending on the type of damage and the value of the merchandise. Sometimes items get sent back to manufacturers, sometimes they go to liquidation companies. Liquidation companies? Carlos glanced around the loading dock, then lowered his voice. Look, kid, some advice. Don't ask too many questions about stuff that's not your department. People might get the wrong idea about your motivations. The warning was clear, but it also confirmed what I'd suspected. Carlos knew exactly what was happening with the damaged merchandise, and he was nervous about my questions. I'm just curious about the business, I said. Rick's been teaching me about inventory management. Right. Carlos picked up his pace, clearly wanting to end the conversation. Well, maybe ask him about that stuff. He's the expert. After Carlos finished his shift and left, I found myself alone and receiving with access to the computer terminal again. But this time, I was smarter about it. Instead of just photographing damage reports, I started looking for patterns in the delivery schedules. What I found made my stomach clench. Every single fraudulent damage claim had been processed on days when Carlos worked receiving. And looking at the employee schedule, Rick always made sure to be on site during those same shifts. The coordination was too perfect to be coincidental. But there was something else. The liquidation company listed on all the disposal forms was called Southwest Electronics Recovery. I'd never heard of them, but according to the paperwork, they've been picking up Megamart's damaged goods for the past 8 months. I quickly Googled the company name on my phone. The website looked legitimate at first glance, professional layout, corporate language about sustainable electronics disposal and recovery. But when I looked closer, something felt off. The contact address was just a P.O. box. The phone number went straight to a generic voicemail. And most telling of all, the business license had only been filed 8 months ago. Right around the time Rick got promoted to district manager. My hands were shaking as I took screenshots of everything. This wasn't just employee theft, it was an elaborate fraud operation with fake companies and forged documentation. The scope of it was staggering. Finding everything you need back here. I spun around to find Marcus standing in the doorway, looking concerned. I quickly shoved my phone in my pocket and tried to look innocent. Yeah, just checking delivery schedules for next week, I said. Okay, but you know you're not supposed to use that terminal without supervision, right? Marcus walked over and glanced at the computer screen. What were you looking up? Just, disposal procedures for damaged items. Rick said I should learn about different departments. Marcus frowned. That's kind of advanced stuff for a part-time retail associate. Maybe stick to your regular duties for now. Of course. Sorry. As Marcus logged me out of the system, I realized I'd pushed too far. If he mentioned this conversation to Rick, I'd have even bigger problems. Everything okay with you lately? Marcus asked as we walked back toward the main store. You seem kinda distracted. Rick mentioned you might be dealing with some stress. There it was again. Rick's narrative about my stress and behavioral changes spreading through management like poison. I'm fine. Just focused on doing a good job. Good to hear. But maybe dial back the initiative a little bit. Sometimes trying too hard can cause more problems than it solves. The rest of that week passed in a haze of paranoia and careful planning. I went through the motions of being a normal teenager, attending classes, eating dinner with Mom and Rick, pretending everything was fine, while secretly documenting every detail I could remember about the theft operation. But Rick was watching me too. I'd catch him studying me during dinner, asking casual questions about my day that felt like interrogations. When I mentioned staying after school for college prep, he'd volunteer to pick me up. When I said I was going to Jake's house to study, he'd offer to drive me there himself, to be helpful. The surveillance was suffocating, but it also told me something important. He was getting desperate. Friday morning brought a new complication. I arrived at work to find Marcus waiting for me with an uncomfortable expression and a manila folder in his hands. We need to talk, he said, gesturing toward the break room. Privately. My stomach dropped as we sat down at one of the plastic tables. Marcus opened the folder and pulled out a printout that made my blood freeze. It was a log of my computer access from the receiving terminal, time-stamped and detailed. Want to explain why you've been accessing systems you're not authorized to use? Marcus asked, his tone more disappointed than angry. I told you, I was trying to learn about different departments. 3 times this week, you logged into inventory management. Twice you accessed damage reports. Yesterday you looked up vendor information for disposal companies. Marcus leaned forward. That's not learning, that's snooping. I could feel the walls closing in. Rick had been monitoring my computer access, building a case that I was the one behaving suspiciously. I was just curious about how the business works, I said weakly. Look, I like you. Your work ethic is solid, and customers generally respond well to you. Marcus rubbed his temples like he had a headache. But Rick brought some concerning patterns to my attention, and now I'm seeing behavior that backs up his worries. What kind of patterns? Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Asking unusual questions about merchandise handling. Showing up for shifts you're not scheduled for. Accessing computer systems without authorization. He paused. And there have been some irregularities in inventory counts during shifts when you've been working receiving. My heart stopped. What kind of irregularities? Missing items. Damaged goods that can't be accounted for. Marcus's voice was gentle, but the implications were devastating. I'm not accusing you of anything. But Rick thinks you might be in over your head with something, and honestly, your behavior this week makes me wonder if he's right. Rick had played this perfectly. Every move I'd made to investigate his operation, he twisted into evidence of my suspicious behavior. My curiosity about damage reports became proof I was involved in theft. My computer access became evidence of unauthorized snooping. I haven't stolen anything, I said, but even to my own ears it sounded defensive. I hope not. I really do. Marcus closed the folder. But I have to follow protocol here. You're suspended pending a formal investigation into inventory discrepancies. The word suspended hit me like a physical blow. For how long? Could be a few days, could be longer. Depends on what the investigation turns up. Marcus stood up, looking genuinely sorry. Turn in your name tag and clean out your locker. HR will call you when they're ready to discuss next steps. As I walked to my locker on shaking legs, I saw Rick across the store talking to a customer, his body language relaxed and professional. He glanced over at me once, and I caught the smallest hint of satisfaction in his expression before he turned back to his conversation. He'd won. Not only had he gotten me suspended, but he'd done it in a way that made me look guilty of the very crimes he'd been committing. If the investigation found that forged document he planted in my room, I wouldn't just lose my job, I'd face criminal charges. But as I packed my few belongings into a plastic bag, a cold fury started building in my chest. Rick thought he was so clever, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd pushed me too far to back down now. The drive home from Megamart felt like a funeral procession. Suspended. The word kept echoing in my head as I sat at red lights, watching normal people go about their normal Friday mornings while my entire future crumbled around me. I couldn't go home yet. Mom would be at work, but Rick had a habit of showing up unexpectedly, and I needed time to think without his predatory smile lurking around every corner. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the public library, seeking refuge in the one place that felt safe and anonymous. I claimed a corner table in the back section and pulled out my phone, scrolling through the photos I'd taken of Rick's fraudulent damage reports. The evidence was still there, still real, but what good was it now? Who would believe a suspended employee accusing his stepdad of elaborate theft? That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. In one of the photos showing Rick's computer screen, there was a small detail in the corner, an email notification preview. I zoomed in, squinting at the pixelated text, SW Electronics Recovery, Payment SONF. Southwest Electronics Recovery. The fake liquidation company. My pulse quickened as I opened my laptop and started digging deeper into the company records. Public business filings, tax documents, anything I could access legally. What I found made my hands shake. The business registration listed an address that I recognized. It was 3 blocks from Rick's old apartment, the one he'd lived in before moving in with us. And the registered agent wasn't some corporate entity. It was Richard K. Morrison. Rick had literally created a fake company to buy stolen merchandise from himself. But that wasn't the most shocking discovery. As I dug deeper into the financial records, I found something that made my stomach drop. Southwest Electronics Recovery had received over $200,000 in payments from Megamart's insurance company over the past 8 months. $200,000. This wasn't some small-time operation where Rick was pocketing a few electronics for personal use. This was systematic insurance fraud on a massive scale. He'd created an entire fake business to launder money from fraudulent damage claims, probably selling the damaged merchandise through online marketplaces or secondary dealers. The scope of it was breathtaking and terrifying. No wonder he was desperate to get rid of me. I'd stumbled onto an operation that could send him to federal prison for years. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Rick told me about work. Come home so we can talk. I stared at the message, feeling sick. Rick was probably already there, spinning some story about how my suspension proved I'd been struggling with the pressure of work and school. Building his narrative about my behavioral problems while positioning himself as the concerned stepfather. As I packed up my laptop, another text came through, this one from Jake. Dude, heard you got fired from Megamart. That sucks. You okay? Fired. The rumor was already spreading, probably started by Rick himself. By Monday, everyone at school would know I'd been suspended for suspected theft. College admissions officers would hear about it. My entire reputation would be destroyed. But then something clicked in my brain. Rick was moving fast, too fast. If he really had everything under control, he wouldn't need to rush the narrative. The fact that he was already spreading rumors and pushing for me to quit completely meant he was scared of what I might do next. Which meant I still had leverage, even if I didn't fully understand what it was yet. As I drove toward home and the confrontation waiting for me, I made a decision. Rick wanted to play the long game, manipulating everyone around him while staying above suspicion. But I had something he didn't expect, nothing left to lose. If he wanted to destroy my reputation and my future, fine. But I was taking his criminal empire down with me. The real war was just beginning. I walked into the house expecting to face Mom and Rick's united front, but instead I found Mom sitting alone at the kitchen table with red-rimmed eyes and a stack of papers spread in front of her. Sit down, honey, she said quietly, not looking up from whatever she was reading. My stomach clenched. Where's Rick? He had to go back to work. Some kind of emergency. Her voice was flat, emotionless in a way that made my skin crawl. We need to talk about these. She gestured to the papers, and as I got closer, I realized what I was looking at. Bank statements. Credit card bills. Financial documents with Rick's name on them. Mom, what? Did you know that Rick has been taking money from my savings account? She finally looked up, and her expression was devastated. $15,000 over the past 3 months. Money I'd been saving for your college expenses. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I found out by accident. The bank called about some unusual activity on my account, and when I looked into it. She gestured helplessly at the papers. Withdrawals I never authorized. Transfers to accounts I've never seen before. My mind was reeling. Rick wasn't just stealing from Megamart, he was stealing from my family. From my college fund. Have you confronted him about it? Mom's laugh was bitter. I tried this morning before he left for work. He said it was just temporary borrowing for some investment opportunity. That he was going to pay it back with interest. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. But then I started looking at his other accounts, and what? He's been lying about everything. His credit score, his financial situation, even his employment history. Mom picked up another document. This says he was fired from his last job for suspected embezzlement, not promoted like he told us. My heart was pounding. Mom, there's something else you need to know about Rick. But before I could continue, we heard his car in the driveway. Mom quickly gathered the papers and shoved them into a manila envelope. Don't let him know I showed you this, she whispered urgently. I need time to figure out how to handle this legally. Rick walked through the front door with his usual confident stride, but I could see tension around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Ladies, he said, hanging up his keys with forced casualness. Sorry about the work emergency. Crisis averted. His gaze landed on me. How are we doing with the situation from this morning? We were just talking, Mom said carefully. Good, good. Rick moved to the refrigerator and pulled out a beer, his movements just a little too controlled. You know, I've been thinking about this whole mess, and I really believe the best thing is for everyone to just move forward. Clean slate. The way he said, clean slate, made my blood run cold. Like he was warning us not to dig deeper into things that were already buried. Actually, Rick, I wanted to ask you about something, Mom said, her voice steadier than I expected. Some discrepancies in our bank account. Rick went very still, the beer bottle halfway to his lips. Discrepancies. Missing money. Transfers I don't remember authorizing. For just a second, Rick's mask slipped completely. I saw rage flash across his face before he caught himself and reconstructed his expression into concerned confusion. That's strange. Maybe we should call the bank together and sort it out. He moved toward Mom, reaching for the envelope. Let me take a look at those statements. I've already called them, Mom said, pulling the envelope away. They're investigating potential fraud. The word fraud hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Rick's smile became predatory. Well, he said slowly, I hope they figure out what happened. Fraud investigations can turn up all sorts of unexpected things. His eyes locked on mine, and the threat was crystal clear. The next few hours passed in the most uncomfortable family dinner of my life. Rick acted like nothing had happened, chatting about weekend plans and asking about my homework while Mom and I pushed food around our plates. But underneath his casual demeanor, I could feel him calculating, watching both of us for signs of what we knew or suspected. You know what? Rick said as Mom started clearing dishes. I think this family could use a little getaway. Maybe drive up to the lake house this weekend, spend some quality time together. My blood chilled. The lake house was 2 hours away from civilization, no cell service, and Rick's suggestion felt less like a family bonding opportunity and more like isolating potential witnesses. That sounds nice, but I have that college interview prep session Saturday, I said quickly. You could miss one session, Rick replied, his tone still friendly but with steel underneath. Family comes first, right? Mom looked between us, clearly sensing the undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Maybe we should wait until things settle down a bit. With everything that happened at work today. About that, Rick interrupted, turning his full attention to me. I spoke with Marcus this afternoon. The investigation is moving pretty quickly. They found some concerning evidence. My heart hammered against my ribs. What kind of evidence? Well, I probably shouldn't say too much since it's an ongoing investigation, Rick said, taking a slow sip of his beer. But apparently someone found merchandise in an unusual location. The kind of thing that could turn a suspension into criminal charges pretty fast. He was talking about the forged document he'd planted in my room. The threat was crystal clear: cooperate, or he'd make sure I was arrested for theft. Rick, Mom said sharply, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything. Just sharing information about a workplace investigation. Rick's smile was perfectly innocent. Though I have to say, some of the evidence is pretty damning. The kind of thing that could affect college applications, scholarship opportunities, that sort of thing. The manipulation was so smooth it was almost artistic. He was threatening to destroy my future while making it sound like helpful concern, and doing it right in front of Mom in a way that made her think he was trying to protect me. I think you should talk to a lawyer, Mom said to me, her voice tight with worry. Actually, Rick said, leaning forward with fake thoughtfulness, lawyers can be expensive. And sometimes these situations resolve themselves if everyone involved makes smart choices. There it was. The final ultimatum. Keep quiet about everything I discovered, or he'd frame me for his crimes and destroy my life. But Rick had made a crucial miscalculation. He thought I was still the scared kid trying to protect my part-time job and college dreams. He didn't realize that watching him steal from my family had changed everything. You're right, I said quietly. Smart choices are important. Rick's smile widened, thinking he'd won. Mom, I think you should know that Rick's been stealing more than just money from your account, I continued, my voice gaining strength. He's been running a massive fraud operation at Megamart, using a fake company to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars in merchandise. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom stared at me in shock, while Rick's expression went through a rapid series of changes: surprise, rage, and then something much more dangerous. That's a very serious accusation, he said softly. The kind of thing that could get someone in a lot of trouble if they can't prove it. I can prove it, I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. I have documentation of everything. Rick stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. Is that so? The game had officially changed, and we all knew it. The silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Rick's friendly mask had completely dissolved, replaced by something cold and calculating that made Mom shrink back in her chair. You know what I think? Rick said, his voice deadly quiet. I think you're having some kind of breakdown. The stress of work, school, maybe some underlying mental health issues. He pulled out his phone. Maybe we should call someone. Get you the help you need. Don't you dare, Mom said, standing up so fast her chair toppled backward. Don't you dare try to gaslight my son while you've been stealing from our family. Rick's head snapped toward her, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely surprised. Sarah, you're upset about the bank thing, but... The bank thing? Mom's voice cracked with fury. $15,000, Rick. My son's college money. And now he's telling me you're running some kind of criminal operation at your job. He's lying, Rick said flatly. Can't you see that? He got caught stealing at work and now he's trying to deflect blame onto me. But Mom was already moving, grabbing her laptop from the counter. Then you won't mind if I call corporate right now and ask them about Southwest Electronics recovery. Rick went white. Actually white, like all the blood had drained from his face. You researched the company, I said, pieces clicking together. Mom, you already knew. She nodded grimly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. After I found the bank discrepancies, I started digging into everything. The business registration, the financial records, all of it. She looked up at Rick with disgust. Did you really think I was too stupid to figure out you created a fake company to steal from your own employer? Rick's composure finally cracked completely. You have no idea what you're messing with. Either of you. He took a step toward Mom. That money was an investment in our future. The Megamart thing was just temporary, until I could build something bigger. By framing your stepson for your crimes. Mom's voice was ice cold. He was going to ruin everything. Rick exploded. Asking questions, snooping around, acting like some kind of detective. I gave him every chance to just quit and walk away. So you planted evidence in his room, Mom said. I found the forged document when I was looking for those bank statements. Pretty sloppy work, by the way. My heart soared. Mom had found Rick's planted evidence and recognized it for what it was. Rick looked between us, realizing his entire plan was collapsing. You can't prove anything. It's my word against a couple of. Against a couple of what? Mom interrupted dangerously. Instead of answering, Rick bolted for the door. He didn't make it far. As he fumbled with his keys in the driveway, 2 police cars pulled up with their lights flashing. Mom had apparently made more than just bank calls that afternoon. Richard Morrison. The lead officer approached with handcuffs ready. You're under arrest for embezzlement, insurance fraud, and identity theft. As they read Rick his rights and loaded him into the back of the patrol car, he caught my eye through the window. Even in handcuffs, his expression was pure hatred. Mom wrapped her arm around my shoulders as we watched the cars disappear down our street. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner, she said quietly. I wanted so badly for us to be a complete family that I ignored all the warning signs. It's not your fault. He was good at manipulation. Yeah, well, he wasn't good enough. Mom squeezed my shoulder. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit is very interested in his little operation. Apparently Megamart wasn't his first victim. 6 months later, I was stocking shelves at a different store, one where the management didn't try to frame me for felonies. Rick was serving 5 to 10 years in federal prison, and the restitution payments meant my college fund was actually bigger than it had been before he'd stolen from us. Sometimes the good guys really do win.